The fork trembled in my hand as Jason's laughter filled the dining room. Rain drummed against the windows, but the storm outside felt gentle compared to what was brewing at my own table. Richard always knows exactly what to do, Rachel said, cutting her chicken with precise movements. When that shipping delay happened last month, he had it solved in 2 phone calls. I watched my son nod eagerly, his eyes bright with admiration for his father-in-law. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking time I'd never get back. That's the difference between real business vision and— Jason gestured vaguely around my dining room, taking in the wooden furniture I'd built with my own hands, the family photos watching from their frames. His meaning hung in the air like smoke. And what— The words came out sharper than I intended. Rachel glanced between us, sensing the shift. Thomas, the dinner is wonderful. Thank you for cooking. But Jason was already warming to his theme. Richard sees the big picture. He doesn't get stuck thinking small. He speared a piece of potato, like this logistics expansion he's planning. That's how you really help people. My jaw tightened. The green beans I'd carefully steamed suddenly tasted like ash. I'd spent 3 hours preparing this meal, hoping for one evening of family peace. Your father works hard too, Rachel said softly, but her tone carried the same unconscious dismissal I'd been hearing for months. Sure, but construction. Jason shrugged. Richard's building an empire. Real legacy stuff. The napkin crumpled in my grip. 37 years of building homes, creating something permanent, something that mattered. Apparently that was nothing compared to moving boxes around warehouses. Richard offered me the regional manager position. Jason continued, his chest puffing with borrowed pride. Says I have natural leadership potential. Natural leadership, I almost laughed. If only Richard knew where Jason's potential had led him. That's wonderful, honey, Rachel beamed at her husband. Your father always knows how to spot talent. Always knows, always sees, always solves. Richard Wilson, the perfect father-in-law who could do no wrong. I set down my fork carefully, afraid I might snap it in half. He's even talking about grooming me for a partnership eventually, Jason went on. Says he needs someone he can trust completely. Trust completely. The irony burned in my throat. It must be nice having someone who believes in you that much, I said quietly. Jason missed the edge in my voice entirely. That's just Richard. He's a natural mentor. Some people have it, some don't. The clock ticked louder. Rain pattered against glass. Somewhere in the house, the heating system hummed to life, trying to warm what had gone cold. He's teaching me about strategic thinking, Jason continued. Long-term planning, real business philosophy. Real business, I repeated. You know what I mean, Dad? Richard operates on a different level. He thinks bigger. Rachel nodded enthusiastically. Remember when he restructured that whole Northwest division? Brilliant. Brilliant Richard. Perfect Richard. Richard who could solve anything, see everything, build empires, while I apparently played with blocks. Some people just have that executive mindset, Jason said, leaning back in his chair, like he was already practicing for the boardroom. The ability to make tough decisions, to really lead. Unlike others, I said. Well, Jason shrugged, his meaning clear. The silence stretched tight as a wire. Even Rachel seemed to sense she'd wandered into dangerous territory. But Jason, flushed with his father-in-law's praise and his own imagined importance, couldn't leave it alone. Face it, Dad, he said, his voice growing louder, more confident. You'll never measure up to my father-in-law. The words hit like a physical blow. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor I'd installed myself. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Jason sat there triumphant and oblivious, while Rachel's face went pale with shock. The rain kept falling, the clock kept ticking, and something inside me went very, very cold. I stood there, gripping the back of my chair as Jason's words echoed in my mind. You'll never measure up. The phrase triggered something deeper, pulling me into memories I'd tried to keep buried. 2 years ago, Jason sitting across from my desk in the home office, his hands clasped tightly, eyes avoiding mine. Dad, I just need to get through this month. His voice had been smaller, then embarrassed. There was this unexpected expense with the apartment, and my paycheck got delayed. I'd written the check for $2,000 without hesitation. My son needed help. That's what fathers did. This is temporary, he'd promised, folding the check carefully. Just until I get back on my feet. 3 months later, he was back. This time it was car repairs and utilities. $3,000. His stories were getting more elaborate, his explanations more desperate. Rachel doesn't know how tight things are, he'd whispered that time. I don't want to worry her. You understand, right, man to man. I understood. I understood that my son was struggling and too proud to let his wife see it. So I opened my checkbook again. By the fourth visit, it had become routine. Jason would call first, testing the waters. Hey, Dad, could we talk sometime this week? Then he'd show up with another crisis, another emergency that only money could solve. I started keeping better records. Not because I didn't trust him, but because the amounts were getting larger. $2,500 one month, $3,200 the next. I wanted to track it all, maybe help him see the pattern, figure out where the money was actually going. The online banking made it easier. No more checks, no more paper trail. He might accidentally leave where Rachel could find it. Just quiet transfers from my business account to his personal account every month like clockwork. Richard's helping with career stuff, Jason had explained during one of our last conversations. But we need cash flow help until the new position kicks in. Richard was helping with career stuff. I was helping with everything else. 75,000 over 3 years. I knew the exact number because I'd calculated it just last week sitting in that same office staring at the bank statements spread across my desk. 75,000 of my sweat, my labor, my careful savings money. I'd earned hauling lumber and mixing concrete and working 14-hour days to build something lasting. All of it disappeared into whatever black hole Jason called his temporary setbacks. The last transfer had been just 3 weeks ago, $2,800 because his rent had gone up and there was some issue with his health insurance. Another emergency, another promise that this was the last time. I really appreciate this, Dad, he'd said over the phone. I know you don't have to do this. Family helps family, right? Family helps family. I blinked, returning to the present moment. Jason was still sitting there, still glowing with his father-in-law's approval, still completely unaware that his perfect world was about to come crashing down. Rachel was staring at me with concern. Thomas, are you all right? The rain outside seemed louder now, more insistent. The warm light from the dining room chandelier felt harsh against my eyes. Everything looked different, sharper, like I was seeing it all for the first time. 25 payments, $75,000. 3 years of being the silent bank while Richard got all the credit for being the generous mentor. My grip tightened on the chair back. All those months of careful planning, of budgeting my own expenses so I could help my son. All those times I'd chosen not to buy something I wanted because Jason needed help more than I needed comfort. And this was my thanks. This dismissal, this casual cruelty. I looked at Jason's face, still flushed with borrowed pride, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but underneath it was something harder, colder. You'll never measure up. We'd see about that. I straightened slowly, letting the weight of 3 years settle into my bones. The rain hammered against the windows, now demanding attention. Jason sat there satisfied with his little speech, while Rachel watched me with growing concern. You think Richard will take care of you? My voice came out steady, controlled, deadly quiet. Jason blinked, some of his smugness faltering. What's that supposed to mean? Simple question. I walked around the table, my footsteps deliberate on the hardwood. When Richard stops being useful to you, when the job doesn't work out the way you planned, who's going to pay your bills? Dad, what are you talking about? Because I won't be sending you money anymore. The words landed like a sledgehammer. Jason's face went white, then red, then white again. Rachel's fork clattered against her plate. What money? Rachel's voice cracked with confusion. We haven't received a penny from you. The silence that followed was beautiful. Jason's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The grandfather clock ticked louder, marking each second of his panic. Jason. Rachel turned to her husband, her brow furrowed. What's he talking about? Jason's hands were shaking now. It's not what you think. What's not what I think? Rachel's voice rose sharply. Thomas just said he's been sending us money. What money, Jason? I crossed my arms and waited. This was delicious. 3 years of careful lies were about to unravel in the span of minutes. There might have been some small, temporary Jason stammered. How much? Rachel demanded. Jason looked at me desperately, silently, begging me to let it go to preserve whatever dignity he had left. The same look he'd given me as a child when he'd broken something and hoped I wouldn't tell his mother. 75,000, I said calmly. Rachel's gasp echoed through the room. 75 what? Over 3 years. Monthly payments, sometimes more when he had special emergencies. I kept my voice conversational, like I was discussing the weather. Car repairs, rent increases, utility bills, medical expenses, always something. Jason, Rachel's voice had gone deadly quiet. Is this true? Jason's face crumpled. Rachel, I can explain. $75,000. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. While I've been worried sick about our finances, while I've been taking extra shifts and cutting back on everything, it wasn't supposed to be that much, Jason whispered. Where did it go? The question came from both of us simultaneously. Rachel and I stared at Jason, waiting for an answer we both suddenly desperately needed. Jason's mouth worked soundlessly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. Jason, Rachel's voice was ice. Where did the money go? Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the dining room in stark white light for just a moment. In that flash, I saw everything clearly. My son's terror, my daughter-in-law's betrayal, and my own cold satisfaction. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the house. Jason opened his mouth to speak, and I leaned forward, eager to hear what lie he'd try next. But more than that, I was eager to watch it all fall apart, because this was just the beginning. I can explain. Jason's voice cracked like a teenager's. Rachel leaned forward, her knuckles white against the table edge. Then explain. Where did 75,000 go? The silence stretched until even the grandfather clock seemed to hesitate. Jason's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. It's complicated. No, Rachel's voice cut through the air. It's simple. You took money from your father. Where did it go? Jason's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. The ice clinked against the sides like small bones rattling. There were some investments that didn't work out. What investments? I kept my voice level, curious. Online trading platforms. Rachel's face went pale. Trading? Since when do you know anything about trading? Jason's carefully constructed facade began crumbling. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air seeping through the windows. I was trying to build something for us, for our future. What kind of trading? Rachel pressed. Different things, stocks, options. His voice grew smaller with each word. Jason. Rachel stood slowly, towering over him, even though she was the shorter of the two. Look at me and tell me the truth. Jason finally met her eyes and something broke inside him. It wasn't trading. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Then what was it? Poker sites, online casinos. The words tumbled out in a rush. I thought I could win it back quickly. Double it, maybe triple it, give you everything you deserved. Rachel stepped back as if he'd struck her. Gambling. You've been gambling with our future. It wasn't supposed to be gambling. I had a system. $75,000. Rachel's voice rose to near hysteria. How long has this been going on? 2 years, maybe 3. Maybe 3. Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't even know how long you've been lying to me. Jason tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. Rachel, listen. I'm done listening. She grabbed her purse from the counter where she'd left it. I'm done with all of this. Where are you going, Shakti? Away from you. She turned to me, her eyes red but dry. Thomas, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I nodded. I know you didn't. Jason finally managed to stand, swaying slightly. Dad, if you could just... No. The word came out harder than I intended. Figure out your problems, Jason, but not in my house. You're throwing me out. You threw yourself out the moment you chose gambling over family. Jason's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light. Desperation, anger, shame, back to desperation. I can stop. I will stop. Then do it somewhere else. Rachel was already at the front door, her coat half on. Jason stumbled after her, making pathetic pleading sounds. Rachel, wait. We can work this out. She didn't turn around. Work what out, Jason? The lies, the addiction, the fact that you've been stealing from your father for 3 years. I wasn't stealing. What would you call it? Jason had no answer for that. I followed them to the front door, watching my son's life implode in real time. The cold air rushed in when Rachel opened the door carrying the scent of rain and fresh earth. I'll call you tomorrow, Jason said desperately. We'll figure this out. Rachel walked to their car without looking back. Jason stood in my doorway for a moment, searching my face for any sign of softness. Dad, good night, Jason. I closed the door and listened to their car start, then drive away into the night. The house felt different already. Quieter, sadder, but also cleaner, somehow. The dinner dishes still sat on the table, the food long cold. I looked at the mess and decided it could wait until morning. Some things needed time to settle. 2 hours later, I sat on my back deck with a glass of whiskey and a pile of bank statements. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clear. Stars peeked through the breaking clouds like scattered diamonds. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to Jason's confession. $75,000. 3 years of careful support all poured down the drain of his addiction. The bank statements told the story in cold numbers. January 2022, $2,000. March 2022, $2,500. By the end of that year, the monthly transfers had become routine. My accountant had probably wondered about the pattern, but had been too polite to ask. I sipped the whiskey and felt it burn away some of the evening's bitterness. The deck chair creaked under my weight, a sound I'd grown to love over the years. I'd built this deck myself, just like I'd built most of the house. 1990. Jason was 5 years old, then more interested in playing with wood shavings than actual construction. He'd followed me around with his plastic hammer, helping by banging on scraps of lumber. When I'm big, I'll build houses too, Daddy. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I spread the statements across the small table, using my phone's flashlight to read the details. Each transfer was labeled the same way: family support. Such innocent words for what had become an enablement system. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human failure. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley. Seattle's lights twinkled like a sprawling circuit board. All those lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to understand. Jason was probably home by now, facing Rachel's anger and his own shame. Part of me wanted to call him to find some way to fix this mess. But that impulse was exactly what had created the problem in the first place. I taught him that money solved everything, that Dad would always be there to clean up his mistakes. Every transfer had reinforced that lesson, making him weaker instead of stronger. The whiskey glass was empty. I considered refilling it, but decided I needed clarity more than comfort. What would happen if I kept sending money? Jason would gamble it away, probably faster each time. His addiction would grow stronger, not weaker, and eventually he'd lose everything anyway, including his marriage. But what if I stopped? The question hung in the cold air like my breath. If I cut off the money, Jason would have to face real consequences for the first time in years. He'd have to choose between his addiction and his life. That choice might save him, or it might destroy him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Jason's contact. One call, one offer of help, and this could all be smoothed over for a while. Instead, I put the phone away and looked up at the stars again. My father had built houses too. Back in the day when construction meant something different, he'd worked with his hands until they were permanently stained with sawdust and paint. When I was Jason's age, he'd pulled me aside one day and said something I'd never forgotten. Son, the only thing you really own is what you earn yourself. Everything else is just borrowed time. I'd built this house for Jason, dreamed of passing it down, watching his children play in the same backyard where he'd grown up. But maybe that dream was selfish. Maybe what Jason needed wasn't inheritance, but incentive. The cold was seeping through my jacket now, reminding me that even March in Seattle demanded respect. I gathered the bank statements and stood slowly, my knees protesting the movement. Inside the house felt warm and welcoming. I locked the back door and turned off the deck light, then made my way to the kitchen. My address book sat in the drawer where it had lived for 20 years. I flipped through the pages until I found what I was looking for. Sarah Lawson, attorney at law. Tomorrow I would make some calls. Tonight I would try to sleep. But first I would make a decision that might change everything. The next morning brought sunshine through my kitchen windows, painting everything in cheerful yellow light. I sat at the table with coffee and the newspaper trying to pretend this was just another ordinary day. The phone rang at 10:30 right as I was reading about the city council's latest budget proposals. Jason's name appeared on the caller ID. I considered letting it ring, but curiosity won. "Hello, Jason." "Dad." His voice sounded rough like he'd been awake all night. "About last night, I know things got heated. Heated is one word for it. I wanted to apologize for the things I said, the comparison to Richard." A pause. That wasn't fair. I sipped my coffee and waited. Jason had always been good at apologies. They came easy to him, smooth as silk. "I also wanted to explain about the money situation. It's not what you think." "What do I think?" "Well," he seemed to lose a momentum. "I mean, it sounds worse than it is. 75,000 in gambling losses. How does that sound better?" "It's not all gone." His voice picked up speed, desperate now. "Some of it I can get back. There are these techniques, strategies." "Jason." "No, listen. I've been studying the systems, the odds. If I could just get a stake together, maybe 5,000 to start." "No." The word hit him like a physical blow. I could hear his breathing change on the other end of the line. "Dad, please, I can make this right. The only way to make this right is to stop gambling. I've stopped. Last night was a wake-up call, but I need to get back what I lost for Rachel's sake." I closed my eyes. The same circular logic that had trapped him for 3 years. "Where's Rachel now?" "At work. She's pretty upset." "I imagine she is. That's why I need to fix this quickly before she does something drastic." Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. "What kind of something?" She mentioned lawyers, divorce lawyers. The word hung between us like a blade. "Maybe that's not the worst idea." "Dad," his voice cracked, "you can't mean that." "I mean that she deserves better than being married to an active gambler." "But I'm not active anymore." "I told you, and then get professional help." "What kind of professional help?" "Addiction counseling, Gamblers Anonymous, residential treatment if necessary." "I don't need—" "That's the only help I'm offering, Jason. Treatment, not money." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. "Richard won't help either," he said finally. "You asked Richard for money." "Yesterday before the dinner." His voice was small, now ashamed. "He turned me down flat. Said I needed to figure this out myself." "Smart man. So you're both against me." "We're both against your gambling." "It's the same thing." "No, Jason, it's not." I could hear him breathing heavily, working himself up to something. "Fine, if that's how you want to play it. This isn't a game. Isn't it rich old man teaching his son a lesson, making him beg?" "Jason, you'll regret this. Both of you will regret this." The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment listening to the dial tone. Then I set the phone down carefully and reached for my address book. Sarah Lawson answered on the second ring. "Sarah, it's Thomas Morgan. I need to discuss some changes to my will." 3 days passed before I could bring myself to make the appointment. I spent those days researching inheritance law online, reading about conditional wills and family disputes. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became that legal action was my only remaining option. Sarah Lawson's office occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower downtown with panoramic views of Elliott Bay stretching toward the Olympic Mountains. I'd known Sarah for over 15 years, ever since she'd helped me incorporate the construction business. Her mahogany desk bore the comfortable clutter of a successful practice law books, client files, and a coffee service that spoke of long-standing relationships. Thomas, she stood as her assistant, showed me in extending a firm handshake. "It's been too long, though I have to say your call sounded urgent." "It is urgent." I settled into the leather chair across from her desk. "I need to change my will." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "May I ask why the last version we drafted seemed comprehensive?" "My son has a gambling addiction." The words hung in the air between us. Sarah's expression shifted from professional curiosity to genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. How serious?" "Serious enough that he's gambled away 75,000 of my money over the past 3 years." Sarah reached for a legal pad, her movements measured and deliberate. "Money you gave him directly. Monthly support payments. He claimed he needed help with expenses. I looked out the window at the city below. Turns out he was feeding an online casino habit. Have you confronted him about this? Last week, he admitted everything, then called me 3 days later, demanding more money to fix the situation. Sarah wrote notes in precise handwriting. What kind of changes are you considering? I want to make his inheritance conditional on getting clean. That's possible. Washington state allows performance-based inheritance terms, provided they're specific and measurable. Relief flooded through me. I'd hoped for this answer, but hearing it from Sarah made it real. What would you recommend? Sarah leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the legal pad. Completion of a certified addiction treatment program would be the most defensible requirement. Inpatient rehabilitation followed by a period of verified abstinence. How long? For gambling addiction, I'd recommend a minimum 6-month treatment program, followed by 1 year of documented sobriety. And if he refuses, then you designate an alternative beneficiary. Many clients choose charitable organizations related to the addiction issue. I thought about Jason's threats on the phone, his ugly tone when I'd refused to enable his gambling. There's a Gamblers Anonymous Foundation here in Seattle. Perfect. That creates a clear incentive structure. He gets help and inherits, or the money goes to help other addicts. Sarah's assistant knocked and entered with fresh coffee. We paused while she served us the interruption, giving me time to process the implications. What about my daughter-in-law? She's innocent in all this. We can include a separate provision for her, a fixed amount regardless of your son's compliance. $50 and $1,000. Sarah made another note. That's very generous. She's a good woman. She doesn't deserve to suffer for his choices. This is clearly a difficult decision, Sarah said gently. Are you certain this is what you want? Family estrangements can become permanent. I thought about Jason's voice on the phone, the entitlement and anger when I'd offered help instead of money. I've been enabling him for 3 years. It has to stop. Then we'll draft something ironclad. I'll need details about the specific treatment and requirements, verification procedures, and timeline considerations. How long will this take? 2 days for the initial draft. We can schedule the signing for this week if you'd like. I nodded, feeling the weight of decisions settle into certainty. Do it. Sarah walked me to the elevator, her expression thoughtful. Thomas, you're doing this out of love, not anger. Remember that when things get difficult. The elevator doors closed on her words, but they followed me all the way home. 2 days later, I returned to Sarah's office for the formal signing. The conference room felt different from her personal office, more sterile, more final. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the legal documents spread across the mahogany table like evidence in a trial. Sarah had assembled everything with her usual precision. Linda Chen, the notary public, sat quietly at one end of the table with her official stamp and record book. 2 witnesses, Sarah's assistant and a building security officer, waited nearby. Before we begin, Sarah said, I want to review the key provisions one more time. She lifted the document, her voice taking on the formal cadence of legal reading. The inheritance is contingent upon Jason Morgan's completion of a certified gambling addiction treatment program. Minimum duration 6 months followed by 1 year of verified abstinence from all forms of gambling. Yes. The words sounded harsh in the sterile room, but I felt only relief. If these conditions are not met within 5 years of your death, Sarah continued, the estate will transfer to the Seattle Gamblers Anonymous Foundation. In Rachel's provision, Rachel Wilson Morgan will receive $50,000 regardless of Jason's compliance or non-compliance with the rehabilitation requirements. Linda looked up from her paperwork. Mr. Morgan, do you understand the contents of this document? I do. Are you signing this of your own free will without coercion or undue influence? I am. The formality felt appropriate. This wasn't a casual family decision. It was a legal restructuring of my life's work. Sarah handed me the pen. Any final questions? I stared at the signature line, thinking about the house I'd built with my own hands, the business I'd grown from nothing. All of it hanging now on Jason's willingness to get help. What if he tries to contest this? The conditions are specific and legally sound. His addiction is documented through the money transfers you provided. Any contest would require him to admit his gambling problem, which actually strengthens your position. I signed my name with steady strokes. The pen felt heavier than it should have weighted with 3 generations of family history. Linda applied her official seal with a satisfying thump. The witnesses signed in turn their signatures, making the whole thing real and irreversible. "One copy for your records," Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table. "One for our files and one for the safe deposit box." I held the folder in my hands, feeling the weight of paper that could reshape Jason's life. "How will the verification work?" "The treatment center will provide completion certificates. For the sobriety period, will require monthly documentation from an approved counselor or testing facility. And if he never gets clean," Sarah's expression softened slightly, "then you'll have the satisfaction of knowing your money went to help other families avoid what you've been through." The building security officer left first, then Linda, with her notary supplies. Sarah's assistant cleared the conference table efficiently, leaving just the two of us in the bright room. "Are you at peace with this decision?" Sarah asked. I looked out at the Seattle skyline, imagining Jason somewhere in those buildings, probably unaware that his future had just changed forever. "I'm at peace with trying to save him, and if he's too far gone, then I'm at peace with that too." Sarah walked me to the elevator again, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "Good luck, Thomas, with everything." The elevator descended through 15 floors of other people's problems, other people's families, other people's attempts to control the future through legal documents. When I reached the parking garage, I sat in my truck for several minutes holding the folder containing Jason's new reality. Tomorrow I would call him. Tonight I would plan exactly what to say. 3 days passed before I felt ready to make the call. I spent the time carefully planning my approach, shopping for ingredients, and preparing the house for what would likely be our final family dinner. The grocery store felt different that morning, like I was shopping for a last meal. I chose simple ingredients: a roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, good bread, nothing that would require complicated preparation or distract from the conversation ahead. At the checkout, Mrs. Patterson from the deli counter asked about Jason. "Haven't seen your boy lately. How's he doing?" "He's learning some important lessons," I said. She smiled and nodded, unaware she was probably the last person who would ask about Jason with genuine affection. Back home, I moved through my kitchen with mechanical precision. The meal prep gave my hands something to do while my mind rehearsed the phone call ahead. By 2:00 everything was ready except the conversation that would change everything. I dialed Jason's number before I could reconsider. "Dad?" His voice carried surprise and wariness in equal measure. "Hello, Jason. If this is about lecturing me again about gambling, it's not. I've been thinking about our conversation about your money situation." Silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear him recalibrating, searching for the trap. "What about it?" "Come to dinner tonight. We'll talk." "Talk about what exactly?" "Your future, Rachel's future, your money problems." "Are you saying you'll help us after all?" "Perfect." The desperation in his voice confirmed everything I'd suspected about his financial state. "I'm saying we should discuss it face to face like family." "Dad, we really need 700. Bring Rachel. She's still pretty upset about everything." "Then maybe it's time to fix things." Another pause. I could hear him breathing, probably calculating how much he could ask for how to play this conversation. "Okay, we'll be there." "Good. See you at 7:00. I hung up before he could ask more questions. The afternoon passed slowly. I set the dining room table with care, using the good china and silverware reserved for special occasions. This qualified as special, though not in any way I'd ever imagined. At 6:30, I retrieved the will from my study and placed it in an envelope on the side table. Everything was ready. The meal, the setting, the legal documents that would reshape Jason's world. Looking around the dining room, I remembered other family dinners from happier times. Jason as a boy excited about school projects. Teenage Jason bringing girlfriends home to meet his father. Young adult Jason announcing his engagement to Rachel. All of it led to this moment. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times. Right on schedule, I heard a car in the driveway. Time to find out if love could still triumph over addiction. The doorbell rang at exactly 700. Through the peephole, I saw Jason and Rachel standing on my porch, both looking uncertain, but hopeful. Jason held a small bouquet of flowers while Rachel clutched a bottle of wine. I opened the door with a warm smile. "Right on time." "Dad," Jason stepped forward, awkwardly offering the flowers. "Thanks for inviting us back." Of course. I accepted the bouquet graciously. Rachel followed, extending the wine bottle. I wasn't sure if we should bring anything. That's very thoughtful. I gestured toward the dining room. Dinner's almost ready. The atmosphere felt entirely different from our last gathering. Warmer lighting from the chandelier cast everything in a golden glow, and I'd opened the windows to let in the spring evening air. The table was set with my good china, the same pieces my wife had chosen decades ago. Something smells incredible, Rachel said, settling into her chair. Just roasted chicken and vegetables. Nothing fancy. I poured wine for all of us, noting how Jason's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. Remember when you tried to help me build the back deck? I asked Jason as I served the meal. Jason laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I was 5. That hammer was bigger than me. You were so determined to help. You never got frustrated, Jason said quietly. You just kept straightening out the nails and letting me try again. Rachel watched our exchange with visible relief. You've always been there for us, Thomas. I want you to know we appreciate it. Family is everything, I said, cutting my chicken with deliberate care. We work through problems together. Jason shifted in his seat. About those problems, Dad. I know things have been difficult lately. I held up a hand gently. Tonight is about family. We can discuss business later. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly. I shared stories about building the house when Jason was young, how he'd supervise from his sandbox while I laid the foundation. Rachel talked about her work, carefully avoiding any mention of financial stress. Jason seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in months, occasionally reaching for Rachel's hand. Remember the tool shed incident? I asked as we finished the main course. Jason groaned. The one I helped you build that collapsed the next day. Your mother took pictures of you standing proudly next to that crooked disaster. I refilled our wine glasses. She said it was the most beautiful shed she'd ever seen. I felt so proud, Jason admitted. Even after it fell down, you helped me understand what went wrong. You never made me feel stupid. Because you weren't stupid. You were learning. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, its deep tones filling the comfortable silence that followed. I could see Jason relaxing more with each passing minute, his confidence building as he interpreted my warmth as forgiveness. Why don't we move to the living room, I suggested, standing, to clear the dishes. I'll bring coffee. Let me help, Rachel offered, but I waved her away. You're guests tonight. Go make yourselves comfortable. As they headed toward the living room, I began clearing the table, stacking plates with methodical precision. Through the doorway, I could hear their quiet conversation. Jason's voice animated as he told Rachel about some childhood memory I'd triggered. I loaded the dishwasher efficiently, my movements automatic after years of practice. The kitchen felt peaceful, filled with the lingering aromas of dinner and the sound of family in the next room. When I joined them in the living room, Jason and Rachel were sitting close together on the sofa, her hand resting on his knee. They looked hopeful, united, ready to rebuild their relationship with me. Coffee will be ready in a few minutes, I said, settling into my chair across from them. Dad, Jason began, leaning forward slightly. I know you mentioned discussing our situation. I nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I've been giving it considerable thought. The anticipation in Jason's eyes was unmistakable. He'd interpreted the evening's warmth as proof that I'd changed my mind about helping them financially. Actually, I said, standing again, let me get something from my study, something I think will interest you both. I returned from my study carrying the manila envelope thick with legal documents. The weight of it felt substantial in my hands. I settled back into my chair, placing the envelope deliberately on the coffee table between us. Jason's eyes fixed on it immediately. What's that dedumpum? I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone, is the result of my thinking about our money discussion. Rachel straightened, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The comfortable warmth of dinner was evaporating, replaced by something more formal, more final. Jason, you mentioned wanting to discuss money. Let's do that. I opened the envelope and withdrew the will, its legal weight making the papers feel heavier than they should. I had my attorney prepare some documents that address your financial situation. Jason reached for the papers eagerly, his face bright with anticipation. Dad, I knew you'd understand. His expression changed as he began reading. The color drained from his face slowly, like water running out of a sink. His voice cracked. This can't be serious. Rachel leaned over to read alongside him, her brow furrowing as she processed the legal language. "What does it say?" she asked softly. Jason's hand shook as he continued reading. He's He's changed his will. I can only inherit if I complete gambling addiction treatment. 6 months minimum in a certified residential program, I confirmed calmly, followed by 1 year of verified abstinence from all form of gambling. "Dad, you can't do this." Jason's voice rose sharply. "I can and I have. The documents are already filed with the court." Rachel continued reading over Jason's shoulder, her expression shifting from shock to understanding. "Monthly check-ins with approved counselors," she read aloud. "Medical documentation required. 5-year deadline from date of death. And if I don't meet the conditions," Jason's voice was barely a whisper, "then the estate goes to the Seattle Gamblers Anonymous Foundation." I leaned back in my chair. "Your inheritance will help other families avoid what we've been through." "This is punishment." Jason stood abruptly, the paper scattering to the floor. "You're cutting me off completely." "No," I said firmly. "I'm giving you the chance to earn what you inherit." Rachel picked up the fallen documents, studying them carefully. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with understanding. "This is exactly right, Jason," she said quietly. Jason spun to face her. "What? Your father is right. You need help, real help, not more money to gamble away." "Rachel, you can't be serious." "I am completely serious." She stood, moving closer to my chair. "Thomas, this is incredibly brave." Jason stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "You're siding with him." "I'm siding with your recovery." She turned back to the will. "It says here, I'll receive $50,000 regardless of whether you meet the conditions." "That's right," I confirmed. "You shouldn't suffer for his choices." "So even if I never get clean, Rachel gets money." "But I don't." Jason's voice was rising toward hysteria. "That's exactly right. This is insane. I'm your son. And that's why I'm doing this." I stood as well, facing him directly. "Because I want you to become the man I raised you to be, not the man addiction has made you." Jason grabbed the will from Rachel's hands, scanning it desperately as if looking for loopholes. "There has to be another way." "There is. Get help." "I don't need—" "Yes, you do." Rachel's voice was steel. "You've been lying to me for 3 years, gambling away our future. Your father is offering you a path back." Jason looked between us, seeing his world collapse in real time. "So that's it. Follow your rules or lose everything." "Follow the rules of recovery," I corrected. "This isn't about control, Jason. It's about love." He laughed bitterly. "Love you call disinheriting your son love. I call giving you a reason to get clean love." Jason stared at the document in his hands for a long moment, then dropped it back onto the coffee table. "I need time to process this." "Take all the time you need," I said. "The conditions don't change." He headed toward the front door, Rachel following after gathering her purse. "Thank you," she said quietly, touching my arm as she passed. I nodded, watching them leave through the window. Jason's shoulders were hunched with defeat, but for the first time in years, I felt something approaching: hope. 2 weeks passed with no word from Jason. I tried to lose myself in work, taking on a small renovation project for a local church that needed attention to its aging roof. The physical labor felt good, a temporary distraction from the hollow space in my chest where my relationship with my son used to be. The phone finally rang on a Wednesday afternoon. I was up on the church roof inspecting some water damage when I felt it vibrate in my pocket. Jason's name flashed on the screen. I climbed down the ladder before answering. "Jason, Dad." His voice sounded different, subdued. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not on the phone. Can you come to our place tonight, around 7? The request surprised me. I'd expected more anger, more accusations. "I'll be there." "Thanks." He paused. "Rachel will be here too." After hanging up, I stood in the church parking lot trying to gauge what this might mean. Was this a peace offering or an ambush? Either way, I had to go. I owed him that much. Jason and Rachel's apartment was in one of the newer buildings in Ballard, a sleek complex with underground parking and a rooftop garden. When I knocked on their door that evening, Rachel answered. Her expression was guarded but not hostile. "Thomas, thank you for coming." She stepped back to let me in. Their apartment looked different. Some furniture was missing, and there were boxes stacked in one corner. Jason stood by the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. He turned when I entered, and I was struck by how tired he looked. There were new lines around his eyes, and he'd lost weight. "Dad," he gestured to the dining table, which was set for three. "We thought we'd have dinner." The meal was takeout from my favorite Italian place in Vermont, a peace offering then. We ate mostly in silence, the conversation stilted and careful. It wasn't until Rachel cleared the plates that Jason finally addressed why he'd called me here. "I'm going to Pine Ridge Treatment Center." He said it flatly without preamble. "I start next Monday." I set down my wine glass carefully. "That's a good facility. How did you decide on Pine Ridge?" "Rachel researched it." He glanced at his wife. "It's supposed to be one of the best for gambling addiction." "It is. I'd done my own research when drafting the will. It has an excellent success rate. 6 months inpatient, just like your will requires." There was a hint of bitterness in his voice, but not as much as I'd expected, followed by their outpatient program. "This isn't just about the will, Jason," Rachel said, returning to the table. "It's about us, our marriage, your future." Jason nodded, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "I know." "What made you decide?" I asked quietly. Jason looked up, meeting my gaze directly for the first time that evening. "Rachel filed for separation." The words hung in the air between us. Rachel reached for Jason's hand, a gesture of support rather than affection. "I told him I wouldn't file for divorce yet," she explained, "but I needed to protect myself financially, and I needed him to understand how serious this is." Jason's laugh was hollow. "Yeah, I got that message from both of you." "I never wanted it to come to this," I said. "Didn't you?" In Jason's voice sharpened. "You changed your will. You planned that dinner, that whole setup. You knew exactly what you were doing. I knew I needed to give you a reason to get help. By threatening to cut me off, by giving you a choice." I leaned forward. "Jason, I've been enabling you for years. Every time I sent you money, I made it easier for you to keep gambling." I had to stop. "So this is tough love, is that it?" The old defensiveness was creeping back into his voice. "It is love," Rachel interjected. "From both of us. We're still here, Jason. We're still fighting for you, but we can't keep pretending everything is okay." Jason stared at his hands for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "The intake counselor at Pine Ridge said I might not make it if I don't get help soon. She said my gambling has escalated to the point where I'm at high risk for—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Self-harm," Rachel finished for him. "She said gamblers with debts like yours often become suicidal." The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. I'd known it was serious, but somehow I hadn't allowed myself to imagine the worst-case scenario. "How bad are the debts, Jason?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. He shook his head. "Bad. Worse than what you know about. I've been taking out payday loans, credit card advances. I even borrowed against my 401k. "How much?" "Almost 120,000 total." The number was staggering. I tried to process what it meant. If he'd gambled away the 75,000 I'd given him, plus another 45,000 from other sources, his addiction was even worse than I'd feared. "We'll figure it out," Rachel said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "The financial counselor at Pine Ridge is going to help us create a repayment plan. That's part of the recovery process." "And the apartment," I gestured to the boxes in the corner. "We're downsizing," Rachel explained, "moving to a smaller place in Lake City. It's not as nice, but the rent is half what we pay here. I could help with—" I started to offer, but Jason cut me off. "No, no more money." His voice was firm. "That's not what I need from you." "What do you need?" He looked at me, his expression vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. "I need you to be there when I get out of treatment. I need to know that doing this isn't just about the inheritance." The request was so simple, so fundamental, that it made my throat tighten. "Of course I'll be there. I'm your father, Jason. That doesn't change no matter what happens." "There's one other thing," Rachel said, glancing at Jason. "The family therapy sessions at Pine Ridge. They want you to participate." "Me, why boy?" "Because addiction affects the whole family," Jason explained. "They said recovery works better when families heal together." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd changed my will to force Jason into treatment, but I hadn't considered that I might need to be part of that process. "When do they start?" 2 weeks after admission," Rachel said. They'll call you with the schedule. I nodded slowly. I'll be there for all of them. Jason's shoulders relaxed slightly as if a weight had been lifted. Not all of it, but enough to let him breathe. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, I'm still angry about the will. I want you to know that. You have every right to be. But I understand why you did it. He looked at Rachel. I understand a lot of things now that I didn't before. We finished the evening with coffee, the conversation gradually shifting to the practicalities of Jason's treatment. What he should pack, how often we could visit, the protocols for phone calls and letters. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was necessary. It was a beginning. When I left their apartment that night, Rachel walked me to my truck. The evening air was cool, hinting at the coming summer. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. I just wish I'd done it sooner. You did what you thought was right at the time. She hugged herself against the chill. We all did. Will you be okay financially, I mean? We'll manage. I've picked up extra shifts at the hospital and we'll have Jason's salary for a while. His company is giving him medical leave. I nodded, relieved that at least that part was taken care of. He's scared, Rachel said. He won't admit it, but I can tell. 6 months is a long time. It is, but it's necessary. I know, she sighed. I just hope it works. I'm not sure what happens if it doesn't. I thought about the will safely stored in my study, about the provisions for Rachel, the deadline for Jason, the alternative beneficiary if he failed. One day at a time, I said. That's what they always say, right? Rachel smiled faintly. Right, one day at a time. I drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, replaying the evening in my mind. Jason was going to treatment. That was what mattered. Whether it was because of the will or Rachel's ultimatum, or his own recognition that he needed help, he was taking the first step. The house felt emptier than usual when I returned. I poured myself a small whiskey and sat in my favorite chair thinking about the weeks ahead. Family therapy. That was something I hadn't anticipated. What would they expect from me? What wounds would they want to examine? What patterns would they try to break? I thought about my own father, about the lessons he'd taught me about responsibility and self-reliance, about how I'd tried to pass those same values to Jason and where I might have failed. Had I been too harsh or too lenient, too distant or too involved? These were questions I'd never really asked myself, not in any serious way. Now I'd have to face them not just for Jason's sake, but for my own. I finished my whiskey and headed to bed wondering if I was ready for the journey ahead. Not just Jason's recovery, but my own reckoning with the past, with the kind of father I'd been, and the kind I wanted to be. As I drifted off to sleep, I remembered something my father used to say. Building a house is easy. Building a life is the real challenge. I'd spent my career constructing homes for other families. Now it was time to rebuild my own. The Pine Ridge Treatment Center sat on 15 wooded acres overlooking Lake Washington, its modern buildings blending seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Through the large windows of the reception area, I could see gardens and walking paths winding between stands of evergreens. It looked more like an upscale retreat than a rehabilitation facility. 2 weeks had passed since Jason's admission. Today would be our first family therapy session. Rachel sat beside me in one of the waiting room's comfortable chairs, leafing through a magazine without really reading it. The tension in her shoulders mirrored my own uneasiness. Mr. Morgan, a woman with a clipboard appeared in the doorway. Ms. Wilson, I'm Dr. Elena Patel, the family therapist who will be working with you and Jason. We followed her down a corridor decorated with serene landscape photographs. Dr. Patel was younger than I'd expected, probably in her mid-30s, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her field well. Jason's made good progress these first 2 weeks, she said as we walked. The initial detox period can be challenging for gambling addicts, not physically, like with substance abuse, but emotionally and psychologically. Has he been able to speak with anyone? Rachel asked. Outside calls, I mean. He's had his scheduled phone time, yes. He mentioned you two have spoken several times. I said nothing. Jason hadn't called me once. Dr. Patel led us into a comfortable room with overstuffed chairs arranged in a circle. Large windows overlooked a Japanese garden where a stone fountain created a gentle background murmur. Please make yourselves comfortable. Jason will join us shortly. I chose a chair facing the door, needing to see my son's face when he entered. Rachel sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. What exactly happens in these sessions? I asked. Family therapy is about healing relationship patterns that may contribute to addiction, Dr. Patel explained. We explore communication styles, unresolved conflicts, and how family dynamics can either support recovery or create barriers to it. You think our family caused Jason's gambling? The defensiveness in my voice surprised even me. Dr. Patel's expression remained neutral. Addiction has many causes: genetic, environmental, psychological. Families don't cause addiction, but family systems often adapt to accommodate it, sometimes in ways that unintentionally enable its continuation. Before I could respond, the door opened and Jason walked in. He looked different, thinner, but somehow more present. The nervous energy that had always seemed to vibrate just beneath his skin was muted. His eyes met mine briefly before shifting to Rachel, who stood to embrace him. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hey yourself," Rachel replied, squeezing his hand before returning to her seat. Jason hesitated, then took the chair between us, creating a triangle with Dr. Patel at its apex. "Thank you all for being here," Dr. Patel began. "Jason, would you like to share what you've been working on these past 2 weeks?" Jason cleared his throat, eyes fixed on his hands. "We've been talking about triggers, the things that make me want to gamble, and about consequences, what gambling has cost me." He glanced up at Rachel, then at me. "What it's cost the people I care about." "That's good work," Dr. Patel nodded. "And today we're going to explore some of the family patterns around your gambling. Is that something you feel ready to discuss?" Jason nodded, though his posture stiffened. Thomas, Rachel, and family systems affected by addiction, we often see certain roles develop. The addict, of course, but also the enabler, the hero, the scapegoat. These roles can become rigid over time, making it difficult for anyone to change their behavior. "I was the enabler," I said flatly. "I know that now. Every time I gave Jason money, I was feeding his addiction." "That's often part of it," Dr. Patel agreed, "but enabling can take many forms. Sometimes it's financial support, sometimes it's covering for the addict, making excuses, or even just keeping secrets to maintain the peace." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "I knew something was wrong for a long time. I just didn't want to see it." "That's very common," Dr. Patel assured her. "Jason, how do you see your father's role in your addiction?" Jason took a deep breath. He made it easier. "Every time I lost money, I knew Dad would bail me out. It was like having a safety net that kept me from ever hitting bottom." The words stung, even though I'd come to the same conclusion myself. "And what about your father-in-law, Richard?" Dr. Patel asked. Jason's head snapped up. "What about him?" "Oh, you've mentioned him several times in our individual sessions. The comparison between him and your father seems significant to you." I felt a flicker of interest. Jason had been talking about Richard. "Richard is different," Jason said carefully. "He's successful in ways my dad isn't, or at least in ways I didn't appreciate before." "Could you elaborate on that?" Dr. Patel prompted. Jason glanced at me, then back at his hands. "Richard built this big logistics company from nothing. He's worth millions. He's got this executive presence, you know. When he walks into a room, people listen. And your father doesn't have those qualities." "No, he does, but it's different. Dad built things with his hands, houses, furniture, real things you can touch. I used to think that was less somehow, not as impressive." I kept my expression neutral, but inside something shifted. It was the first time Jason had acknowledged any value in my work. "And how does that comparison relate to your gambling?" Dr. Patel asked. Jason was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I wanted to be like Richard, to have what he has. I thought if I could just get a big win, I'd have capital to invest to build something impressive. Something that would make everyone," he faltered. "Something that would make Dad proud." The admission hung in the air between us. I felt my throat tighten. "Jason," I started, but Dr. Patel held up a gentle hand. "Let's stay with this for a moment. Jason, do you believe your father wasn't proud of you before?" "Not wasn't proud, just disappointed. Maybe I never followed him into construction. Never built anything real." "Is that true, Thomas? Were you disappointed in Jason's career choices?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I was proud that he went to college, that he found his own path. I never expected him to pick up a hammer just because I did. But you never said that, Jason interrupted, a hint of the old defensiveness creeping into his voice. You never showed any interest in my work. It was always about the next house you were building, the next project. Was that true? I searched my memory trying to recall conversations about Jason's job. There had been some, surely, but they were vague in my mind compared to the vivid recollections of showing him my own work sites. I'm sorry, I said finally. I didn't realize I was doing that. It's a common pattern, Dr. Patel observed. We often express pride and interest in the things we understand best. Rachel, how do you see this dynamic between Jason and his father? Rachel looked thoughtful. There was always this tension, like they were speaking different languages. Jason would talk about some business strategy, and Thomas would nod, but you could tell he wasn't really connecting with it. And Thomas would show Jason something he'd built, and Jason would compliment it, but it felt obligatory, Jason finished, like I was just going through the motions. I felt a sudden sharp regret for all those missed connections, all those years when we'd been talking at each other instead of to each other. Let's shift focus slightly, Dr. Patel suggested. Thomas, you made a significant decision recently regarding Jason's inheritance. Could you share your thinking behind that? I glanced at Jason, unsure how much he'd told her. It's okay, he said. She knows about the will. I explained the conditional inheritance, the treatment requirement, the provision for Rachel. As I spoke, I watched Dr. Patel's face for any sign of judgment, but her expression remained neutral. Some might see that as controlling, she observed when I finished, using your financial leverage to force Jason into treatment. It was, I admitted, but I didn't know what else to do. He was destroying himself, and I'd been helping him do it for years. Jason, how did you feel when your father presented you with this condition? Angry, betrayed. Jason's voice hardened, like he was giving up on me. Was that your intention, Thomas? No. I leaned forward, wanting Jason to see the truth in my face. It was the opposite. It was the only way I could think of to not give up, to give you a reason to fight. But it wasn't your choice to make, Jason argued. You backed me into a corner. You were already in a corner, Rachel interjected. You just couldn't see it, Dr. Patel raised a hand. Let's remember that recovery isn't about assigning blame. It's about understanding patterns and finding healthier ways to relate to each other. She turned to Jason. However you got here, you're doing the work now. That's what matters. Jason nodded reluctantly. Thomas, I'd like to ask you a difficult question. Dr. Patel continued. What will you do if Jason completes treatment but relapses afterward? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on getting him into treatment that I hadn't really thought about what came after. I don't know, I admitted. That's an honest answer, Dr. Patel said. Recovery isn't a straight line. Relapses are common, especially in the first year. How would you respond if that happened? I thought about it carefully. I'd be devastated, but I wouldn't give up on him, even if it meant watching him struggle without stepping in to fix it. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I think I'd have to let him find his own way back, but I'd be there when he did. Something shifted in Jason's expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The rest of the session focused on practical matters, the family support Jason would need after treatment, and strategies for Rachel to protect her finances while still supporting his recovery, ways I could rebuild trust with my son that didn't involve money. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Patel handed each of us a folder. Homework, she explained with a smile, exercises to help you practice new patterns of communication. We'll discuss them next week. In the parking lot, Rachel checked her watch. I have to get to work. Night shift. She hugged Jason tightly. You're doing great. I'm proud of you. When she drove away, Jason and I were left standing awkwardly beside my truck. I can walk you back, I offered. Actually, I have 30 minutes before I need to be back. Jason gestured to a bench overlooking the lake. Could we sit for a bit? We settled on the bench, watching sailboats drift across the water. The April sun was warm on our faces, promising summer. Dad, Jason broke the silence. There's something I need to tell you. Something I didn't want to say in front of Dr. Patel. My stomach tightened. What is it? When I said I wanted to be like Richard to make you proud, that wasn't the whole truth. I waited, giving him space to continue. The real truth is I was trying to prove you wrong, to show you that I could be more successful than you, make more money, be more important. He stared out at the water. Every time I sat at that poker table or logged into those gambling sites, I was thinking about how I'd rub it in your face when I hit it big, how I'd finally have something you couldn't match. The admission hurt, but I appreciated his honesty. And now I see how messed up that was. How I was gambling to prove something that didn't need proving. He looked at me directly. You were never competing with me, were you? Never, I shook my head. I only ever wanted you to be happy. I think I knew that somewhere deep down. But it was easier to make you the villain. To blame you for not being Richard, for not having millions, for not being impressed enough by my corporate job. I was impressed, Jason. I just didn't know how to show it. Your world seemed so far from mine. Yeah, he sighed. I get that now. We sat in silence for a moment, more comfortable than before. They make us write letters here, Jason said eventually, to the people we've hurt. I've been working on yours for days. I can't seem to get it right. You don't need to. I do. I need to say it, and you need to hear it. His voice grew firmer. I stole from you, Dad. I lied to you for years. I took advantage of your love and your generosity, and then I had the nerve to throw it back in your face. Jason, let me finish, please. He took a deep breath. I am so sorry, not just for the money, but for the way I treated you, for comparing you to Richard, for making you feel like you weren't enough. I felt tears threaten and blinked them back. I forgive you. Just like that. No, not just like that, but I do forgive you. You're my son. That doesn't change no matter what happens. Jason's answering smile was small but genuine. I should get back. Group therapy at 3. I walked him to the entrance of his residential building. Before he went inside, he turned and hugged me awkwardly at first, then with real feeling. See you next week, he asked. I'll be here. I watched him disappear through the doors, then made my way back to my truck. The drive home felt different somehow. Not lighter exactly, there was still so much work to do. So many patterns to break, but clearer. Like the first glimpse of a foundation taking shape after weeks of digging. The next 6 months passed in a rhythm of weekly family therapy sessions, individual counseling for all 3 of us, and the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding trust. Jason moved through the phases of the Pineridge program with determination, tackling each challenge as it came. There were setbacks, a particularly difficult session when Jason finally admitted the full extent of his gambling debts, including loans from people no one should borrow from. A week when Rachel discovered yet another credit card he'd hidden maxed out and months overdue. The day Jason's employer finally ran out of patience and terminated his position, eliminating the salary that had been helping Rachel stay afloat. But there were victories too. Jason's 90-day sobriety chip celebrated with sparkling cider in the Pine Ridge dining hall. The financial plan developed with the center's counselors realistic if painful. The gradual return of the son I remembered from before the gambling took hold, quick-witted, thoughtful, capable of seeing beyond his own needs. By the 5th month, our family sessions had shifted from excavating old wounds to planning for the future. The question that dominated these discussions was simple but loaded. Where would Jason live after treatment? I can't go back to our old apartment, Jason acknowledged. Too many triggers. The new place is too small anyway, Rachel added, and you need to be close to your outpatient meetings. What about your house, Dad? Jason asked. Just until I find a job and get back on my feet. I hesitated. My first instinct was to say yes to offer whatever help I could. But Dr. Patel had worked hard to help me recognize the difference between support and enabling. I think that might be too easy, I said carefully. Too much like the old pattern where I solve your problems. Jason's face fell, but he nodded. You're right, I need to figure this out myself. What about the carriage house? Rachel suggested. It's separate enough to give you independence, but close enough for support. The carriage house was a small structure behind my main home, originally built as a workshop, but converted years ago into a guest apartment. It had its own entrance, a small kitchenette, and just enough space for one person to live comfortably. That could work, I agreed, but there would have to be clear boundaries, rent, house rules, a timeline for moving out. Absolutely, Jason said quickly. I'd pay market rate once I find a job, and I'd follow whatever rules you set. We should discuss this with Dr. Patel, Rachel cautioned. Make sure we're not setting ourselves up for problems. Dr. Patel approved the plan, but with specific conditions. Jason would pay reduced rent until he found employment, then market rate. He would attend daily GA meetings for the first 90 days after discharge. Rachel would maintain her separate residence until they'd completed at least 6 months of couples counseling, and I would attend weekly Al-Anon meetings to maintain my own boundaries. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a careful one. A bridge between the enabling of the past and the independence Jason would eventually need to sustain. On the day of Jason's discharge, I drove to Pine Ridge alone. Rachel had wanted to be there, but a crisis at the hospital had required her to work a double shift. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of early October day that made Seattle feel like the most beautiful city on earth. I found Jason in his room packing the last of his belongings into a duffel bag. 6 months in treatment had changed him physically. He'd lost the softness around his middle, gained muscle from the daily workouts that helped manage his anxiety. But the bigger change was in his eyes. The shifty, desperate look was gone, replaced by something clearer, more grounded. "Ready?" I asked from the doorway. He zipped the bag closed and looked around the small room one last time. "As I'll ever be." The discharge process took longer than expected. Forms to sign prescriptions for the anti-anxiety medication that helped manage his cravings, final meetings with his primary counselor and case manager. It was nearly noon by the time we pulled out of the Pine Ridge gates. "Hungry?" I asked as we merged onto the highway. "Starving! Hospital food gets old after 6 months. What are you in the mood for?" "Honestly, one of those steaks from that place on Lake Union, the one with the deck over the water." I laughed. "That's a celebratory meal if I ever heard one. Let's do it." Over lunch, Jason outlined his plans for the coming weeks. Job hunting, starting with a lead from one of the counselors at Pine Ridge. Outpatient therapy 3 times a week. GA meetings every day, sometimes twice if the cravings got bad. "What about Richard?" I asked the question that had been hovering at the edge of our conversations for months. "Have you spoken with him?" Jason set down his fork. "Not yet. Rachel's talked to him a few times. Told him about the treatment. He sent a card." He shrugged. "I'm not sure what to say to him. You know, he was right to turn me down when I asked for money, but I'm still embarrassed." "Yeah, and angry if I'm being honest. Not at him exactly, just at the whole situation." I nodded, understanding better than he knew. I'd wrestled with similar feelings about my own role in his addiction, the fine line between responsibility and blame. "You'll figure it out," I said, "when you're ready." After lunch, we drove to my house, our house now, at least temporarily. Jason's eyes widened when he saw the carriage house. "You fixed it up." I smiled. "Just a little paint, some new furniture." Rachel helped. The space was simple but comfortable. A queen-sized bed, a small couch facing a modest TV, a desk by the window overlooking the garden. The kitchenette gleamed with new appliances, and the bathroom had been updated with a modern shower. "Dad, this must have cost a fortune. Consider it an investment in your recovery." I handed him a key. "You're home for as long as you need it, within reason." Jason took the key, turning it over in his palm. "Thank you. I won't let you down. Not again." "I know you won't." I hesitated, then pulled an envelope from my pocket. "There's one more thing." "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a single page stamped with Sarah Lawson's official seal. "Amendment to the last will and testament of Thomas James Morgan," Jason read aloud. He looked up, confusion in his eyes. "I don't understand." "Keep reading." His eyes moved down the page, widening as he reached the key paragraph. Having completed the required treatment program at Pine Ridge Recovery Center, Jason Morgan has satisfied the primary condition for inheritance. The remaining condition, 1 year of verified gambling abstinence, remains in effect. His voice trailed off. "You're removing the requirement for me to finish treatment." "You've already finished it. You did the work, Jason. You earned this." "But the sobriety requirement still stands, because staying clean is the real challenge. The treatment was just the first step." Jason stared at the document, then carefully folded it back into the envelope. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. One day at a time, right?" "Right." He looked around the carriage house, taking it all in. Is it okay if I get settled? I think I need some time to process everything. Of course. Dinner at the main house at 6 if you feel up to it. Nothing fancy, just pasta. I'll be there. I left him to unpack, making my way back to the main house. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. I'd lived in this house for nearly 30 years, but today it felt different, fuller somehow, as if a missing piece had finally been returned to its proper place. The phone rang as I was chopping vegetables for dinner. Rachel's name appeared on the caller ID. How did it go? She asked without preamble. Good. He's getting settled in the carriage house now. And how are you doing? I considered the question. Cautiously optimistic. And you know, the same. It's strange, isn't it? After all these months of focusing on his recovery, suddenly he's out and we have to figure out what normal looks like. One day at a time, I reminded her of the mantra we'd all adopted. One day at a time, she agreed. I'll come by tomorrow after my shift. We can have breakfast together, all three of us. He'd like that. After we hung up, I continued with the dinner preparations, my mind drifting back to the scene in the carriage house. The look on Jason's face when he read the amendment. Not triumph or satisfaction, but something quieter, something like peace, Mommy. 6 o'clock came, and with it a soft knock at the back door. Jason entered freshly showered and wearing clothes I didn't recognize, new ones probably purchased in anticipation of his discharge. Something smells amazing, he said, following me into the kitchen. Just spaghetti carbonara, your mother's recipe. The one with the secret ingredient? I smiled. Extra garlic and don't tell anyone. We worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. Jason tossed the salad while I drained the pasta. It reminded me of earlier times before the gambling took over, when family dinners were a regular occurrence rather than carefully orchestrated interventions. Over dinner, we talked about simple things. The Mariners' chances in the upcoming season, the new coffee shop that had opened down the street, the renovations I was planning for the bathroom upstairs. I could help with that, Jason offered. I'm not as skilled as you, but I can handle basic construction. I'd like that. I tried to keep my tone casual, but the offer meant more than he probably realized. It was the first time in years he'd shown any interest in building something with his hands. After dinner, as Jason was helping clear the table, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression changing from relaxed to guarded. It's Richard, he said, showing me the display. Are you going to answer it? Jason hesitated, then nodded. I think I should. He stepped onto the back deck for privacy. Through the kitchen window, I could see him pacing as he talked, one hand gesturing emphatically. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes before he came back inside. Everything okay? I asked, trying to sound neutral. Yeah, actually. Jason looked surprised. He wants to meet for coffee tomorrow, to talk about moving forward, he said. That sounds positive. It does, doesn't it? Jason's smile was cautious but genuine. He mentioned a junior position in the company, something entry-level but with room to grow if I prove myself. The old me might have felt jealous or threatened. Richard offering what I couldn't, a prestigious job, a second chance in the corporate world. But 6 months of therapy had changed me too. That could be good for you, I said. A fresh start. Maybe. Jason leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. But I've been thinking about something else, actually, a different direction. Oh, remember how I helped design that website for the Gamblers Anonymous group at Pine Ridge? The one that tracks local meetings and resources? I nodded. Jason had mentioned it a few times during family sessions, how he'd used his business skills to help streamline the center's outreach efforts. I've been talking with some of the counselors about expanding it, making it a proper platform for recovery support. There's a real need for better digital tools in addiction treatment. You want to build a company around that? Maybe. He shrugged. It's just an idea at this point, but it feels right, using what I'm good at to help people facing the same struggles I did. Pride swelled in my chest, not the complicated, conflicted pride of the past, but something cleaner, more genuine. That sounds like important work. It would mean starting small, probably working out of the carriage house at first until I could afford office space. The carriage house has good internet, I offered, and I know a thing or two about starting a business from scratch. Jason's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself standing at the window looking out at the lights still burning in the carriage house. Jason was up late, probably working on his recovery journal or preparing for tomorrow's meeting with Richard. 6 months ago, I changed my will out of desperation, using the only leverage I had to force my son into treatment. It had been a gamble of my own, risking our relationship for the chance to save his life. Tonight, watching that steady light in the darkness, I finally knew I'd made the right bet. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that painted Seattle in gold and amber. I was already at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper when I heard footsteps on the back stairs. Jason appeared at the door dressed for his meeting with Richard, pressed slacks, a button-down shirt, hair neatly combed. "Morning," he said, helping himself to coffee. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all." He settled across from me, adding a splash of milk to his mug. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound of the rustle of newspaper pages turning and birds calling from the garden. "I'm nervous about seeing Richard," Jason admitted finally. "That's understandable. It's been a while." "It's not just that," he stared into his coffee. "The last time I saw him, I was asking for money. He saw right through me, knew exactly what I was going to use it for. Richard's a good judge of character. He told me I needed to stand on my own feet, that he wouldn't enable my poor financial choices. He didn't use the word gambling, but he knew." Jason shook his head. "I was so angry at him. I thought he was being cruel when really he was being kinder than you were. How do you figure that he just said no, you said no, but then you took it a step further? You forced me to face what I was becoming. I hadn't thought of it that way before. I guess we both did what we thought was right. The difference is your way worked." Jason's gaze met mine, steady and clear. "I wouldn't be here if you hadn't changed that will. I'd probably be dead or worse." "What's worse than dead?" "Alive but completely lost. Still gambling, still lying, still watching everything good in my life slip away." The starkness of his assessment took my breath away. For all our therapy sessions, all our careful conversations about recovery, we'd never discussed just how close to the edge he'd been. "You know," I said, carefully, "there were times I wondered if I'd done the right thing, if I was being too harsh." "You weren't." His voice was firm. "You saved my life, Dad, and I don't just mean by getting me into treatment. You saved me by refusing to keep enabling me even when it was the harder choice." I didn't know what to say to that. We sat in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Deeper, more meaningful. "Rachel's coming for breakfast," I remembered suddenly. "She should be here any minute." As if on cue, we heard a car pull into the driveway. Jason rose to meet her, and I watched through the window as they embraced beside her car. There was a tentative quality to their hug, the caution of people finding their way back to each other after a long separation. But there was warmth too, and that gave me hope. They came in together, Rachel's face bright, despite the exhaustion of a night shift. Jason moved to the stove, offering to cook eggs the way he used to on Sunday mornings before the gambling took over. "That would be wonderful," Rachel said, settling at the table with her own cup of coffee. I excused myself to shower, giving them time alone. When I returned 30 minutes later, they were sitting close together, heads bent over something on Jason's phone. "Dad, come see this," he called, beckoning me over. "I've been working on a prototype for that recovery platform I mentioned." He showed me the mock-up, a clean, intuitive interface that would allow recovering addicts to track meetings, connect with sponsors, and access resources all in one place. "This is impressive," I said, meaning it. "How long have you been working on this?" "On and off for a couple of months. The counselors at Pine Ridge let me use their computer lab during free time." He scrolled through more screens explaining features and functionality with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. Rachel watched him with a mixture of pride and caution. "It's a great idea," she said when he finished, "but starting a company is a big undertaking, especially now." "I know." Jason set the phone down. "That's partly why I agreed to meet with Richard. If I take the job he's offering, I could work on this in my spare time, build it up slowly while having steady income." "That sounds sensible," I offered. "It does," Rachel agreed. "Though knowing you, once you get passionate about something, I throw myself into it completely." Jason smiled ruefully. "That's the double-edged sword, isn't it? The same intensity that made me a good gambler could make me good at this too." The difference is where I direct that energy. I thought about my own work, the single-minded focus I brought to each construction project. Maybe Jason and I were more alike than either of us had realized. After breakfast, Jason left for his meeting with Richard and Rachel, and I found ourselves alone at the kitchen table. "He seems really good," she said. "Better than I expected, honestly." "The real test comes now," I reminded her. "Treatment is one thing, but staying clean in the real world." "I know." She traced the rim of her coffee cup. "That's why I haven't moved back in with him yet. I need to be sure this time." "You're doing the right thing. For both of you." "I hope so," she sighed. "I love him so much, Thomas. I never stopped loving him even at the worst of it. But love isn't always enough, is it?" "No," I agreed. "Sometimes love has to be tough to be real." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Like changing your will. Like filing for separation." "Do you think we'll make it as a family, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. I think we've all done the hardest part, admitting there was a problem and getting help. The rest is just showing up every day and doing the work. "One day at a time," she said with a small smile. "Exactly." After Rachel left for some much-needed sleep, I turned my attention to a small renovation project in the main house bathroom. The work was simple, replacing an old vanity with something more modern, but it felt good to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of measurement cutting and installation. I was tightening the last fixture when I heard Jason return his footsteps crossing from the back door to the bathroom doorway. "How'd it go?" I asked without looking up. "Better than I expected." He leaned against the door frame watching me work. "Richard offered me a position in their IT department. Entry level but solid, benefits regular hours." "Are you going to take it?" "I think so, at least for now." He stepped into the bathroom, examining the new vanity with an appraising eye. "This looks good. The clean lines work better in this space." "That's what I thought too." I stood wiping my hands on a rag. "Need any help getting settled in the carriage house? Hanging pictures, arranging furniture?" "Actually, yeah, if you've got time." We spent the rest of the afternoon turning the carriage house into something that felt like home. Jason had few possessions. Most had been sold to pay debts or left behind in the apartment he'd shared with Rachel, but that made the task simpler. By evening, the space had taken on his personality books, arranged by topic rather than author, a small desk positioned to catch the morning light, a framed photo of him and Rachel on their wedding day placed beside the bed. As we were finishing, Jason's phone chimed with a message. He glanced at it, then looked up with a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "It's from my sponsor at GA. He's reminding me about the meeting tonight." "Are you going?" "Absolutely." He pocketed the phone. "Every day for the first 90 days, remember, no exceptions." "Do you need a ride?" "No, I've got it figured out. Bus stop's not far, and the meeting place is just a few blocks from there." I nodded, proud of his planning, his commitment to the routine that would support his recovery. "I should head out soon," he said, glancing at his watch. "But I wanted to give you something first." He crossed to his desk and opened the drawer, removing an envelope similar to the one I'd given him the day before. He handed it to me without explanation. Inside was a handwritten letter 3 pages long, the paper slightly wrinkled, as if it had been written and rewritten many times. "It's the letter I told you about," Jason explained. "The one I was working on at Pine Ridge. You don't have to read it now, but I wanted you to have it." "Thank you." I tucked the envelope carefully into my shirt pocket. "I'll read it tonight." Jason nodded, seemingly relieved to have completed this task. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, turning back briefly. "Dad, I'm glad we're doing this. Starting over, I mean." "Me too, son, me too." After he left, I returned to the main house, the letter a tangible weight against my chest. I waited until after dinner, until the house was quiet, and I was settled in my favorite chair before opening it. "Dear Dad," it began, "how do you apologize for betraying the person who has always believed in you? I've rewritten this letter a dozen times, and I still don't have the answer. But I'm going to try anyway." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked them away and kept reading 3 pages of raw, honest reflection on the damage he'd done, the shame he carried, and the commitment he was making to a different kind of life. The final paragraph stayed with me long after I folded the letter back into its envelope. "I can't undo the past 3 years. I can't return the money or erase the lies. But I can promise you this. Every day from now on, I will make choices that honor your faith in me. I will build something worthwhile, something real. Not a fortune or an empire, but a life you can be proud of. A life I can be proud of. That's my promise to you, Dad. And this time I intend to keep it. I slept better that night than I had in months, perhaps years. The weight I'd carried, the worry, the guilt, the constant vigilance hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had shifted, become lighter, somehow. In the morning, I woke early and made my way to the kitchen, surprised to find Jason already there brewing coffee. "You're up early," I observed. "Job starts today." He handed me a mug. I wanted to get a head start, make sure I had time for breakfast and my morning meeting. Nervous. A little. He smiled. But the good kind of nervous, like I'm starting something important. We sat at the table watching the sunrise paint the kitchen in soft gold. In the quiet, with steam rising from our mugs and birds beginning to sing outside, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Recovery never was. There would be difficult days, moments of temptation, perhaps even setbacks. But sitting there with my son in the gentle light of a new day, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. We would face whatever came next together one day at a time. And for now, that was enough.